Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hanging in to this fourth in a series of presentations, probably the last of this conference. We're running out of time with cumulative overrun, so I have two options. I can talk very fast, which I can do, or I can try to give you the bare bones, the skeleton of an argument which is contained in one of the research reports which WISE has commissioned this year. I'm going to choose that latter option in the hope that we will drive you towards reading the report and perhaps following up, because it's an interim report which we're inviting you to contribute to. Before I do that, I guess I'd want to, just at this, as the conference draws to a close, think about the kind of trajectory or the arc of discourse at this conference in WISE. And because the development goals are such a fundamental feature, previously the Millennium Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals, we end up year after year going from, we need more, we need access, so many kids aren't in school, we must have more, to then, what we need is better, because as Jenny put it, we can't carry on with business as usual. Just getting access won't do. But increasingly then, we come to the point of better on the existing model won't do either. What we need is different. What we need is transformation. And as we know, we are seeing around the world, through the efforts of groups like IDEO and my own organization, the concept of design thinking, the concept of entrepreneurialism, leading to terrific exemplars of great new instances of learning institutions, learning settings, which are transformational. But our problem is not just one of scale, how do they grow up alongside the existing government systems, but how do they replace them? How do we get from where we are now to where we want to be, with learners who are empowered, who are passionate, who can learn for life, want to learn for life, with the skills that they will need in an unknowable century, but one which is full of existential threat. And that challenge is immense. We were given the opportunity to think about this issue of system, by creating a report based on our research from around the world, which is called Creative Public Leadership: How School System Leaders Can Create the Conditions for System-Wide Innovation. So I'm inviting you now to think about systems and not just individual institutions, or not just great instances of innovations going to slightly larger scale. And we know a great deal about how system transformations work, whether that's in energy systems or transport or medical health systems, public hygiene. We apply very few of those lessons to education systems and learning. But I'll give you the argument in outline. It runs like this. Critiques of mass schooling are now familiar, and they're increasingly accepted. And if you doubted it, you just had to be in Fernando Rima's session yesterday, or better still, Ricardo Semler, who completely, in my view, put before us a devastating critique of what the mass schooling systems created for an industrial revolution and now utterly out of date with our needs, what they do. The need for innovation is at last less contested. And it's not just a question of improving the existing model, it's a question of transforming and replacing it. But how do we get from there to here? Individual innovative learning environments now abound. You heard from Jenny a series of case studies about them. And the problem, however, is systems. Whether those systems are the entrenched and deeply conservative systems of the global north, or whether they are in areas where, frankly, governments have failed and entrepreneurs, private sectors have had to move in and replace what governments ought, in truth, to be providing for their citizens. The problem is very serious, because that report that Jenny mentioned, the 100-year gap, points to the fact that it would take 100 years for kids in developing nations to reach the existing standards of kids in the so-called rich global north. We are exporting to the developing world a failed model, and that failed model is going to fail them in the end. We should be exporting and exciting new systems to create a very different system of learning, and we can do it because we know what those innovative learning systems or innovative learning environments look like. They're driven by passion, they're relevant to the real world, they utilize constructive, active learning, they have at their heart social purpose. They are less teacher-directed and much more co-created by young people themselves from their passions. And they're deeply imbued with great technology, which enables our generation to solve problems as never before. We know what those great learning environments look like. To get it to system level is a different challenge. But to create the kind of systems we need, a new form of system leadership is required. It needs to be creative, it needs to be enabling, and it needs to be entrepreneurial. We cannot continue to think about the guardians of our public education systems as the kind of regime holders determined to protect the conventional systems of the 19th century. And we are seeing examples of them around the world. The question really, I guess, is who will lead the direction of change? If you read many commentators, they would say, as actually Ricardo Semler did yesterday, it ain't going to come from within the education sector. We can't do it because we're too involved, we're too implicated, we're too invested in that old system. And if you look at the case studies which are generally held up, it's true. They are brought about by outsiders, whether they're edutech companies, corporates, new providers, people who have become utterly compelled by the critique of the old system and determined to create the new through innovative learning environments, but doing outside those systems. Where are educators in this process? Where are the learners? Our view is that they can and they should be involved in this process of change, and it's not going to be left to the edutechs, to the corporates, to the new providers, somehow to be the architects of the new system for a whole range of reasons. To go about this, we've started to think about the characteristics and the behaviours of great system leaders, whether from inside government systems or outside. And if you look at two of the recent laureates, Sir Fazli Abed or Vicky Colbert, who's been at this conference this year, and also someone like Larry Rosenstock, who runs the San Diego group of schools and the most innovative, fantastically powerful learning environments in the world in the US. You can start to see the kinds of behaviours, the kinds of dispositions that we think need to characterise our public service leaders, and, as I say, are increasingly doing so across the world. In that shift, the role of the state is going to have to change too, from being overly prescriptive and directive and a conventional regulator to a state which is an authorising and facilitative, supportive platform for systemic innovation. Open, permeable, but nonetheless keeping in sharp view the state's responsibility for equity and for quality. We think this is possible. And amongst the recommendations, there are 9 at the end of the report. I'm going to pick out 4. Public service leaders increasingly need, in our view, to start building the case for change, the burning platform. Unless they start to do so, we will not find the discretionary energy or investment to start to shift our systems in the direction in which they need to go. A great example of this is Joel Klein in New York City, who, when he was commissioner of the New York City schools, presided over the strongest improvement, a bit like London actually, in graduation rates that the city had ever seen. But building his case for change went like this. This is terrific, we've done really well, but it is nowhere near enough. And if you dig into our data, you will find we are failing African Americans, the gap is growing. And anyway, this improvement in graduation rates is on a level of former graduation which is not equipping our young people for work and is nowhere near fit for the 21st century. A nuanced, a really difficult case to prosecute, and you need great PR skills to do it, but that's what we think our public leaders need to do. Create a sense of urgency about how we need to shift. We think they need to desist from waves of short-term, centrally driven reforms. As a great book recently I read termed it, "So much reform, so little change." We've been very good in government systems at creating waves of short-term, frenetic new reforms which puzzle and frustrate practitioners and leave students under increasing pressure. Thirdly, we suggest creating and protecting spaces for some design thinking, Sandy, and for other forms of innovation, local curriculum design, pedagogical innovation, through incubators, accelerators, and networks, which will enable people working within the public sector to draw from these great case studies and to do it not under the radar and in secret, but as the R&D engine for our public services. And finally, starting to recast system leadership in public service as a form of system entrepreneurship. Thinking entrepreneurially, what does that mean? It means acting as a broker, acting as a facilitator, as well as acting as a steward. Bringing one's full creativity as a public service leader to bear. So, as quickly and sharply as I can, that's the outline of our argument. You will find the interim report there, and please download it, but if you want a hard copy, it's in the Majlis. And as I said, this is an interim report. We would really love to hear your responses to our analysis, to our proposals for first steps that we think government public service leaders can take. Please do contribute, and we'd love to incorporate your views in the final report. Thank you for listening.